The city of Ravenwood was known for its tranquility and the beauty of its natural landscape. But that night, something sinister was about to happen. Darkness enveloped the small town like a shadowy cloak, while heavy clouds covered the moon and stars. The rain fell intensely, creating a scene worthy of a horror story. Emily, a 25-year-old with an unwavering passion for nature, decided to venture out on a solo hike. She was known around town as the Forest Girl, someone who always found peace and inspiration in the trails and woods around Ravenwood. That night, however, was no ordinary night. With a backpack containing a flashlight, a bottle of water, and a waterproof jacket, Emily left her modest home and entered the darkness that lay beyond the city. His goal was simple, an overnight hike to connect with nature in its wildest form. The trail she chose took her deeper into the forest, where tall trees leaned under the weight of the rain and fallen leaves formed a damp carpet beneath her feet. The wind howled through the treetops, and the sounds of the night echoed unsettlingly. But Emily was determined to explore the unknown. As she walked, the young woman began to feel a strange presence. A shiver ran down her spine, and she stopped to listen. The sound of dry leaves being trampled and branches breaking made her alert. Someone, or something, was in the forest with her. Who's there? Emily called, but only the echo of her own voice answered. Her heart was pounding, but she convinced herself that perhaps it was just a nocturnal animal, a fox or deer. She continued walking, trying to ignore the feeling that she was being watched. But the presence persisted, moving in the shadows and following his footsteps. The darkness of the forest seemed to pulse with life, and the atmosphere became more sinister with each step. Little by little, sinister shadows began to move around him. She could see the outlines of human figures, but she could not make out their faces in the darkness. An intense cold dominated her, and she understood that she was no longer alone. Her survival instinct warned her to turn back, to return to the safety of her home, but she fought the fear. Emily decided it was time to turn back, but when she turned around, the trail that led her there was gone. Panic began to take over her. She felt trapped in that ominous forest. The tree branches stretched out like claws, and the darkness closed in around them. The forest he knew so well was unrecognizable. "This can't be happening," Emily whispered to herself, but the forest continued to enclose her in its cold shadow. It was as if nature itself was conspiring to keep her there, trapped in its web of twisted trees and impenetrable darkness. And so, the first part of your night walk turned into a nightmare. Emily was lost in the forest, surrounded by ominous shadows and a feeling that something terrible was about to happen. She could not imagine what awaited her in the next parts of this terrifying story. Darkness closed around Emily as she desperately tried to find a way back. The forest that used to be their peaceful refuge now seemed like a distorted and frightening place. Twisted trees seemed to lean menacingly, branches stretched out like claws in search of prey, and bushes whispered in an unintelligible language. As Emily moved through the forest, the shadows seemed to move with her. Human figures, dark and indistinct, followed her from a distance, but always out of her direct field of vision. Their footsteps were muffled, but the sounds were unmistakable. Whispering voices also echoed in his mind, unintelligible and sinister words. They were like murmurs of lost spirits, trying to convey a message she couldn't understand. The feeling of paranoia enveloped her more and more, and Emily wondered if she was losing her sanity. As she continued to walk, Emily came to a clearing in the forest. In the center, a solitary and peculiar tree stood out. Its roots resembled gnarled claws, and its trunk seemed to vibrate with a strange energy. Emily approached the tree, feeling drawn to it in an inexplicable way. She reached out to touch the rough trunk, and immediately, a current of electricity coursed through her body. Her vision began to blur, and she felt like she was disconnecting from herself. Then, a terrifying vision enveloped her. She saw herself as part of the forest, her roots sinking deep into the earth. It was as if she was connected to all the trees, all the creatures, and all the nature around her. Emily was a guardian, a vital part of the forest, but also a prisoner of that cursed place. The young woman struggled to understand the meaning of the vision. She was no longer just a visitor in the forest. She was intrinsically linked to her. Emily was destined to protect the forest, but she was also trapped by its gnarled claws. As the vision faded, Emily staggered back, shocked by what she had just experienced. The peculiar tree, now dark and sinister, seemed to mock her with its twisted roots. Emily realized that, somehow, she had become a part of the forest itself. The forest, with its heavy atmosphere and unsettling shadows, surrounded her in a way she could not understand. She was a guardian, but also a prisoner of that cursed land. The young woman, in shock and despair, now faced a choice: accept her destiny as guardian of darkness, or fight to find a way to break the curse that kept her trapped. The next parts of this terrifying story would reveal the consequences of her decision and the sinister forces that surrounded her in the cursed forest. Emily remained frozen in front of the twisted tree, trying to process what she had just experienced. She was bound to the forest in a way that defied all logic, and the feeling of being trapped by the curse terrified her. As she pondered her situation, the rain continued to fall, soaking her clothes. It was then that a hooded figure emerged from the shadows. The figure was standing before the peculiar tree, with a dark cloak that hid its face. The presence of the figure was frightening, and the silence that accompanied it was unsettling. The hooded figure stared at Emily, and a hissing voice echoed in her mind. "You are bound to this forest now, guardian. A choice presents itself to you." Emily felt defenseless in front of the enigmatic figure. "Who are you?" she whispered, trying to stay calm. "I'm just an observer," the figure replied. "You are trapped here, but there is a path that can take you back to your life. However, the choice will not be easy." The enigmatic being offered Emily a pact. She could be freed from the curse that bound her to the forest, but only if she accepted the role of guardian of that cursed land. Accepting the pact would mean she would have the power to control the shadows, warding off intruders from the forest and keeping the darkness at bay. Emily was torn. The idea of returning to her life and escaping that terrifying forest was tempting, but she knew that accepting the pact would have unpredictable consequences. She didn't trust the hooded figure and feared that the pact could be an even worse trap. The hooded figure remained motionless, waiting for Emily's decision. "Time is short, guardian. The night advances, and the darkness does not wait." Emily closed her eyes and pondered her decision. She knew there was no guarantee of breaking the curse otherwise. Her love for nature compelled her to protect it, but the idea of being a guardian of the darkness haunted her. Finally, in a gesture of resignation, she agreed to the pact. The hooded figure held out his hand, and she shook it, sealing the deal. Once the pact was made, the feeling of being trapped in the forest weakened, and the curse lost some of its hold on Emily. The hooded figure whispered words of power, and the twisted tree trunk began to glow with an ominous light. Emily felt the power of the forest flow through her, and the darkness receded. She'd become the guardian of that cursed land, and now the curse was under her control. As the last echo of the hooded figure's words faded, the rain began to ease, and the forest calmed. Emily looked around, seeing the shadows recede and the human figures disappear. She was free, but at what price? Emily couldn't help but feel trapped in a new kind of darkness. She had become the guardian of that cursed forest, and her life would never be the same. The next parts of this terrifying story would reveal the complexities of her new role and the dark forces that still surrounded her in the cursed forest. Emily accepted her role as guardian of the forest, but the feeling of restlessness and darkness that surrounded her persisted. She felt like she was trapped in a constant nightmare, not knowing what the future held. With the pact made, Emily now had the ability to control the shadows of the forest and ward off intruders, but the curse surrounding her was still a powerful and mysterious force. She could feel the ominous presence of the hooded figures that had drawn her to the forest, but she could never figure out who they were or what they really wanted. Night after night, Emily walked through the forest, keeping intruders at bay and watching the darkness. His existence had turned into a horror story that spread across the city of Ravenwood. The locals knew the forest was a cursed place, and the legend of the Guardian of Darkness kept them away from those twisted trees. Emily, however, was not at peace with her role. The forest continued to whisper in her mind. The shadows seemed to move on their own, and the darkness tormented her even when she wasn't in the forest. She was becoming part of the very curse she was supposed to control. One night, while walking through the woods, Emily sees a disturbing vision. She saw the hooded figures, the same mysterious beings that had drawn her to the twisted tree. They approached her, their dark silhouettes gliding between the trees. The hooded figure stopped before her, and the same hissing voice that she had heard at the moment of the pact echoed in her mind. "Guardian, the time has come to fulfill your end of the bargain." Emily felt a shiver of fear as she looked at the hooded figures. They seemed like beings from a different dimension, a supernatural presence that she couldn't fully understand. "What do you want?" she whispered, trying to stay calm. The hooded figures explained that the forest curse was linked to an ancient entity, a dark force that required regular sacrifices to keep the curse at bay. Emily had become the guardian of the forest, and it was now her responsibility to offer these sacrifices. The idea terrified her. She had not signed the pact to harm other beings, but to escape the curse that imprisoned her. She tried to resist, but the hooded figures enveloped her in insurmountable darkness, and she found herself unable to move. Feeling helpless, Emily was forced to witness the macabre rituals that the hooded figures performed. They brought animals to the forest, innocent creatures that were sacrificed in the name of the dark entity. The spilled blood fueled the curse, keeping it alive and terrifying. Emily realized she was trapped in a never-ending cycle of horror. She had accepted the role of guardian of the forest to escape the curse, but now she was condemned to perpetuate it. She was part of a dark pact that forced her to commit terrible acts in the name of the mysterious entity. With each sacrifice, the curse grew stronger, and the darkness in the forest seemed more insidious than ever. Emily was trapped, unable to escape her dark fate. The last part of this terrifying story reveals Emily's destiny as the guardian of darkness, her desperate attempts to break the cycle of sacrifice,